Is this thing on?
I think they can hear us a bit better now. Do you think they are ready to change the status quo?
It's one thing to get them listening, but now let's get them to act.
You are now about to witness the strength of nursing knowledge.
Welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion on health and healthcare. My name is Sara Fung.
My name is Amie Archibald-Varley, and we are your hosts. Our Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail national best-selling book is available now. Get your copy of The Wisdom of Nurses today. You can get a book for purchase at any of your local retailers like Indigo or Chapters, or pick up your book online through Amazon or other types of retailers. It's also available in various different formats like audiobook and on Kindle. If you read it and you loved it, please leave us a review.
Please make sure you subscribe on our YouTube channel where you can watch our podcast in video format. Like, share, and leave a review. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or any other podcast platform, leave us a rating and review. Thank you to all our listeners and sponsors who continue to support us.
Your support makes our podcast possible, and we're grateful for the partnership and for you believing in our work here at the Gritty Nurse Podcast. Stay gritty. Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amie.
And my name is Sara.
And we are your hosts. We are so excited. We always are excited to have this special guest come onto our podcast. He is an expert in his field. And again, I think this is a timely discussion, particularly with seeing kind of what's evolving in the States and related to healthcare and violence against CEOs and the whole conversation around, even healthcare providers being a part of, murder and mystery. We have the one, the only Bruce Sackman. Sara, take it away.
Yes, Bruce has been on our podcast a couple times before. And if you've been listening, he is amazing. So he's on yet again to talk about something that he's never talked about before. And without further ado, I just want to tell you a little bit more about Bruce. So he was a special agent in charge of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, Office of Inspector General, Criminal Investigations Division, Northeast Field Office until May 2005 when he retired after 32 years of service. And in this capacity, he was responsible for all major criminal investigations involving the VA from West Virginia all the way to Maine. And during his tenure, he was involved in hundreds of investigations involving allegations of fraud, corruption, false claims, thefts, patient assaults, pharmaceutical drug divisions, and suspicious hospital deaths, which is what he's talked about before. And Bruce is a former self-employed licensed private investigator in New York City, specializing in healthcare-related matters. Under contract, he had directed major investigations for a large New York metropolitan regional hospital healthcare system. And he is a fellow author of a book. He wrote a book called Behind the Murder Curtain: Special Agent Bruce Sackman Hunts Doctors and Nurses Who Kill Our Veterans. So welcome back again, Bruce. We're so glad to have you today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And as you said, this is really a very interesting time to talk about hospitals and hospital investigations.
Yep.
With all that's going on in the world, people often ask, why do hospitals need an investigator? I mean, why should hospitals have their own internal investigator? What could possibly go wrong in a hospital?
Well then,
famous last words.
I mean, look, we know about, things like malpractice and all that, but there are so many issues that can happen in a hospital because, look, hospitals are like small cities.
Yep.
I mean, they have thousands of employees, multiple locations. There's a hospital out here on Long Island. 22 hospitals are in that system.
Wow.
22.
Wow.
Thousands of employees. So what could go wrong? Well, just a quick list of some things that could go wrong, of course, is the physical safety of patients and staff that you had alluded to. Very, very, very big concern nowadays. But in addition to that, how about we even have the security of the patient information?
Right.
Yeah.
We're very concerned about that. How about the security of the narcotics and the dangerous drugs we have? all right? And then sometimes we have these union issues. I always actually liked working with unions, to tell you the truth, because I discovered that unions don't want bad employees either.
Right.
To defend bad employees, they're there to defend the good employees. And I always worked very, very closely with unions. So I was always very pro-union, even being on sort of the management side, you might say. And then, of course, there's research. In those hospitals that get involved in research, and there's a lot of money in research. And then sometimes there's research fraud, and that's something where the investigators get involved in as well. And then we have all these contract and procurement issues, because look, hospitals are constantly what? Building new wings, and they're procuring everything from the most complex scientific equipment to like diapers and everything in between. So there's all these procurement issues. And then we have hackers, right? Hacking into our medical systems. And that I could talk to hours just on that topic alone. And then there's all these external issues, particularly here in the US, where hospitals are sometimes accused of defrauding the government with Medicare and Medicaid. So there are so many issues that a hospital investigator can get involved with. Not every hospital has an investigator. Sometimes they want the legal department, the personnel department to handle these things. I really don't think that's a particularly good idea, because I was an investigator when I was in the private sector after I left the government under contract. So I had a lot of independence, right? I really didn't work for the management. I really was very independent. And if they didn't like what I had to say, well, they could have always fired me.
Right.
But never did. And so, but I'll tell you the number one issue that I found, and we talk a lot, we've talked about the medical serial killers, which we're not going to talk about today. But you know what's happened recently? There have been a number of cases where physicians have been involved in the sexual assault of patients, and nothing gets me angry other than my medical serial killers, of course, than this particular issue. Are you familiar with the name Dr. Robert Hayden in New York?
No, but I know we have our own cases here in Ontario and in Canada where I know you're going to touch on it, but same thing, boils our blood, because typically nothing's done.
Yeah.
Slap on the wrist, and then they're back out to practice. So tell us, Bruce, what's happening in New York?
I want to read something to you from this publication called ProPublica. Right now, this happened at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, which is the #1 primo hospital in New York City. Okay, the #1. I want to read this to you. For more than 2 decades, patients of an OBGYN named Robert Hayden warned Columbia University that he was sexually inappropriate and abusive. One woman even called the police and had him arrested, but Hayden was allowed to return to work days later and still see patients, all right?
Yep.
Over the years, Hayden's superiors failed to take action. To date, more than 245 patients have alleged that the obstetrician abused them. And Columbia, a prestigious institution committed to the highest standards of ethical conduct, continues to aggressively fight new lawsuits from its victims.
Right.
My God, that makes my blood boil.
45 patients. How many patients does it take for management to wake up and take these people out of patient care? Is it 10 complaints, 20 complaints, 100 complaints, 200 complaints, 245 complaints? I can't actually believe what I'm reading here. One of the victims, I don't know if you remember, there was a presidential candidate. His name was Andrew Yang. Do you remember?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yep.
His wife was one of the victims of this.
Oh, didn't even know that.
This is not the only case. All right, this is not the only case. And nothing boils my blood more than management that continues to support these people because they bring in a lot of money. I mean, that's what it is. They bring in continues to support these people, allegation after allegation after allegation. Now, look, it's not every hospital and it's not every management, obviously. I tell you, the last hospital that I worked for, they had a completely different attitude. There were no cover-ups. There were nothing like this. But when an institution as prestigious as Columbia Presbyterian in New York actually engages like this, how could people trust? How could they have a trust in management like this when 245 patients, well, look, New York Presbyterian paid out millions and millions, and eventually the doctor wound up in jail.
Right.
But look how much suffering has to go through that. You could be like the world's greatest hospital investigator, but if management doesn't support what you're doing, what your findings are, then it's all just a waste of time. And this is not the only case. I just want to go through one or two others because it incensed me so much. All right. This is one. Illinois' OBGYN gets 3 years in prison for sexual assaults. Dozens of patients alleged that he was dozens of patients. Okay. The sexual abuse is the tip of the iceberg, said Tamara Holder, the attorney representing 36 women.
Oh.
Am I missing something here?
So
women in civil lawsuits against Ortega and former employer North Shore University Health System, who have accused the university physician of sexually assaulting them under the guise of medical care. Not only did North Shore refuse to believe its female patients, it also billed them for this doctor's abuses.
Oh my God. So Bruce, what do you think? So I know we kind of mentioned management, and I think Sarah and I have actually had this conversation too about, these specific cases. I think management's one part, but I also think that here particularly we've seen that it's also the unions and the backing and the power that the physicians have that stops any type of prosecution. They have so much power in terms of the money that their unions are willing to fight with, that most civilians just don't even have the moxie to go up against these folks, the physicians, because it's just like they have almost unlimited funds to continue to fight, the public system, to fight, individuals who are bringing these claims. So as much as I think management's a part.
If I was a manager, I wouldn't care if they had the money of Elon Musk. I would get them the hell out of there. And you know what? Sue us. I'd rather go to court and be sued that way than actually allow this person to remain on there. Now, look, one allegation, two allegations. I've had cases where patients have accused physicians of sexually being inappropriate, and I found out those allegations were false.
Right.
So it's true all the time, okay? But when you have a small army of women lining up here and suing, and you still allow this doctor or nurse or whoever to engage in patient care, is so outrageous. It angers me to no end. And I'm really not an angry guy because I've seen it all. But I tell you, this really does anger me. I just want to go through one other case. It says, I feel so violated. Over 200 patients accused doc of sexual abuse, unnecessary exams. More than 200 women and several men who have joined the consolidated lawsuit against Dr. Derek Todd in Massachusetts. It alleges Todd, a former rheumatologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital, an excellent hospital, by the way, whose specialty involves treating inflammatory conditions of the muscles, joints, and bones, began abusing patients in 2010. The lawsuit, combining several filed last year, accuses Todd of performing unnecessary pelvic, before therapy breast exams, testicular exams, and rectal exams on patients. And this is the quote that gets me. The other thing that strikes me about this case is how could this have been going on at the hospital, at the practice group for so long without somebody recognizing that something suspicious was going on? Yet they allowed him continue to do this week after week, month after month, year after year to more and more victims.
Yeah, that is so wrong. And I think, Bruce, this is a perfect example of hospitals putting profits over people. And really, it's the ultimate violation of trust. Like, it makes me so angry because when you talk about the 200 plus victims, that makes me think that there's so many more out there that didn't have the courage to report it or try to report it and weren't believed. And I'm drawing a lot of parallels between this and the medical serial killers that you talk about. Do you think there's a typical profile or a way to sort of identify some commonalities with all of these bad actors?
I have in my book, when it comes to the medical serial killers, my red flags. I have not really, and I'm glad you mentioned this because this is something I may start to concentrate on. I have not really looked into the red flag of these physicians and medical professionals who sexually abuse patients. But that's something that definitely needs to be done, and it needs to educate the staff. But the problem is, and I think you alluded to it, is that a lot of staff are afraid to come forward. And I understand this. They're afraid to come forward for a number of reasons. One, they may not be believed. Two, they're not going to be supported. Three, they're afraid that something terrible is going to happen to them for coming forward. Four, they have a willful blindness. They don't want to know. They don't want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand this. We had talked about, but I want to mention it again, this case in Texas, in a place called Kermit, Texas, where these nurses were criminally prosecuted for alleging physician wrongdoing. And if you remember this case, what happened was these two nurses in a hospital in Kermit, Texas, a very small hospital in the oil basin there. They went to management and they said, we believe this doctor is harming patients. And the management said, you know how hard it is to find doctors in Kermit, Texas? Why we have to go all the way to the Philippines to find doctors. So you know what? Be happy you have a job. Be happy this hospital is in business. Go back to your office and don't say a word. And these two nurses, very professional, they said, well, what the hell do we do now? So one nurse said, well, I have an idea. Let's send an anonymous letter to the Texas State Medical Board about this doctor. Well, they do that, and the doctor gets wind of it, and boy, is he pissed. So he calls the local sheriff, who happens to be one of his patients, and he says, Sheriff Roberts, I think these women are intentionally trying to harm my reputation. So you know what? I want you to investigate them. And he says, all right, Doc, I'm on the case. And he gets a search warrant for their hospital computers. And he determines that they're the authors of the anonymous letter to the state. He has them arrested and prosecuted for misuse of official information. These ladies get fired. They have no support from management, no backing, nothing. They're on their own. They go to trial. Jury's out for about 20 minutes, and the jury comes back and says, what, are you kidding me? These nurses deserve a medal for what they did,
Right.
not to be criminally prosecuted. But what kind of message did that send out to all the potential whistleblowers out there? Hey, did you hear about those two nurses in Texas? You hear what happened to them? Oh, yeah, they won eventually, but look at the hell that they went through. Do you want to go through that hell? I don't think so. So you know what? Don't say anything. Just keep your mouth shut. And let's just hope for the best. Let's hope he or she moves on to the next hospital. And this is why you have so many victims. You saw you heard what I read. hundreds and hundreds of victims of these cases. It just bothers me to no end. It just, I mean, don't these doctors have mothers and sisters? I mean, would they want them to be treated that way? I just get so upset over it. My
Yeah,
wife has to
I
calm me
think
down because
Yeah, I know. I think this speaks to a greater conversation, right? Just kind of what we were saying at the top of the episode in terms of, all the tensions are high. And again, I think you kind of touched on something that's kind of making me think a little bit more too about the whole fact of people not being believed, not being listened to, our voices not being heard, patients' voices not being heard. And it's almost, we're seeing the ramifications of people not feeling heard or feeling that disconnect between themselves and a healthcare provider or the healthcare system in the States. Like I'd mentioned kind of just at the beginning, just you're in New York. I mean, it's all over the news talking about Luigi Mangione, particularly him acting out on on a healthcare issue. And we know that that's not the right solution. But when people are feeling compelled, they're not being heard by the healthcare system, how do we prevent things like this from happening? How do we catch these bad actors before they commit these types of crimes to patients and families? Or can patients and families be more proactive? Like, I don't know, when it comes to sexual assault, like you can't blame the individual, but at the end of the day, if we're not being heard or listened to, what can we do? So how do we prevent things like this from happening?
well, I'll give you my personal opinion. Until some of these managers are removed, fined, and maybe even imprisoned for covering up these crimes, they'll never happen because there's no motivation for a manager to turn these people into the police, to call the police.
Yeah.
When we talked about our medical serial killers, how management wouldn't even cooperate with the police when they came in. Well, the same thing with these cases. Why doesn't management cooperate? Well, for one, they're afraid of the reputation to their hospital, but more importantly, nothing's going to happen to them if they
Yeah, that's a
spend
problem.
their time defending the hospital, working with their legal department to defend the hospital, knowing that they themselves will never be charged for covering up the crime, will never lose any money for covering up the crime, might even get a bonus for covering up the crime.
Yeah.
This is going to continue. Now, in Germany, it's interesting in Germany. In Germany, they actually had a medical serial killer and management covered up for him, and they arrested the managers, but they were never convicted. The
Wow.
managers were never convicted, okay? So unless and until management's managers say, holy cow, if we cover this up, I may go to jail. I will lose my job. I will lose my house. I will lose everything. Until that happens, we'll be having more and more of these stories. And if the law doesn't allow it, then let's change the law because we have to hold these managers. If I'm the president of a hospital and I keep defending and defending this doctor who 200 women say has abused, and I don't cooperate with the police and I stonewall the investigation, should I still be the president of that hospital? I should be on the goddamn unemployment line, to tell you the
Yeah.
truth.
No, I agree
At
with
a
you.
minimum, at a minimum, I should probably be in jail. And until we change the laws and the rules, this is going to continue because it's all about money.
Yeah,
Right.
the US is in a tricky situation right now. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, we're watching up here and we're kind of like, we're terrified for, folks for healthcare out there and for, with your government is changing in January 20th. And, there's real fears about how healthcare is going to be dealt with. And again, I think, the laws need to be changed, and that's the only way that we can go about doing this proactively. But I'll be honest, I feel if we have billionaires who again see profit over people, that we're not going to see that change. And I think that people are getting angry and we're seeing the result of that anger, and that's also a problem as well.
Yeah, and
we can't have people doing that either, right?
I think what you're alluding to, Bruce, though, is we need to change the law. And in order to do that, we need to get political and we need to raise awareness and we need to advocate. We can't just sit back anymore and rely on people to act out of the goodness of their hearts, because clearly that is not working. And we're not saying all hospital CEOs are this way, but there are enough of them that this is a problem.
Yeah.
And they're not incentivized to do anything, like you said.
One is one too many, but there are numerous ones. And I just mentioned 3. If you just spent some time on Google, you would find this all over the world.
Yeah.
Where hospital managers are defending these terrible, terrible employees who not only harm patients, but who sexually abuse them, who take advantage of them, and management continues to defend them. And until management is held accountable, and I think legally they should be, both from a civil standpoint and maybe a criminal standpoint, it's not going to change.
Yeah, it's a very tricky situation. Like I completely agree. I agree that, that is the best way forward, that there is some accountability measures put in place where, managers, CEOs, all these different leaders are held accountable for, these crimes that happen within the healthcare system, to patients and families. But I don't see it happening right now. And that's a huge problem. And again, we don't want to see vigilante justice either. We don't want to see people acting out on the fact that they don't feel that they're seen or heard. So we need a solution. And it's about time that, folks in the US actually start standing up for their healthcare and being like, these insurance companies, these various different folks that are acting in bad faith, that physicians or other team members who are sexually assaulting patients, that something is done. I do agree that prison sentences and things like that should be carried out. It's just a matter of time that, the people have to come together and say enough is enough, and definitely not through violence.
Oh, of course not. Look, I know of no hospital manager or owner of a pharmaceutical company, for that matter, like the Sattler family with the oxycodone, whoever went for jail and their actions resulted in the death of how many thousands of people, and until that changes, it's all going to be, well, we could buy our way out of this.
Yeah.
Everything will be fine.
So Bruce, I have a question for you in terms of your work and your previous work as a medical investigator. Just thinking about the climate now, do you see that role is going to be something that will still stay in place, or do you think that the days of medical investigators might be over? What are your thoughts?
It sort of varies from institution to institution because the management sets the tone.
Wow.
You have some management that have zero tolerance for fraud, waste, and abuse of any kind. And I must say that was the way in the last hospital that I was in. To their credit, they were wonderful. But some of my counterparts in other hospitals had a different experience. Management was only interested in keep this in-house. Don't call the police. Let's just move on. Everything's got to be quiet. Don't say anything. And it was very frustrating for them. So I was fortunate that I didn't have a management like that. But management sets the tone. And I think more often than not, it's not the positive tone that we like. Certainly not exclusively like that, but more often than that. And look, I understand there are a lot of problems and a lot of issues in the hospital, but this to me is just sort of mind-boggling how we should never have to open up the newspaper or turn on the news and read again about hundreds of women and men also complaining that they were abused and the management's still covering for this stuff. That should never happen again in our life. Should never happen.
So Bruce, I have another question. So I feel like this is kind of moral distress, what you're potentially dealing with. Like you find a crime happening in a hospital, let's say, and you bring this forward to the management and they choose not to do anything. What is your role? Or do you have a role other than presenting the facts to them?
Yeah, well, that's always sort of a moral dilemma for investigators, particularly those. If you're an employee of the hospital, you're going to say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and go on to your next case. when you're an independent person like me, then it sort of becomes a moral issue,
Right.
because what should we do? Me being independent, if I thought the hospital was covering something up, oh, I would just go on and I would go to the police or I would go to the authorities because I don't care. I mean, I got a pension, I got a wife that makes a lot of money. I'm a happy guy.
Right.
But for somebody who's just part of the hospital team, it's a very, very difficult decision for them. And more often than not, they really have no choice. They have to keep their job. So they go on. And that's why the system allows this thing to go on and on and on. But it's been a real dilemma. I haven't faced that. I've been very fortunate, in the private sector. I mean, in the government, there was not an issue because the Inspector General is an independent agency, and we just go to the U.S. Attorney all the time, and we don't care what the manager says.
Right.
Nothing to us. But when you're an employee of the hospital,
Different.
that's a whole different story. Many times, sometimes the hospital will put together a committee to look into these allegations. Well, who's on the committee? All the employees of the hospital.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we know that well.
It's like having, I don't know if this is a fair comparison, like the mafia investigate the mafia. I mean, it just,
I'd say it's fair.
Yeah, yeah.
it shouldn't work that way. All right. It really shouldn't work that way. Or sometimes they'll call in an outside law firm, but they're paying that law firm.
Right.
So that law firm has a vested interest to kind of side with the client,
Right.
Mhm.
paying them, and this is why this goes on and on and on. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that because this is the one issue that always sticks in my craw. Every time I read another story like this, I just go bonkers because I think it's like one of the most terrible things because there are so many wonderful, fantastic, terrific employees in the hospitals. I met them all. I could not have solved any of my cases without their help. Without their help, I could have not solved any of these cases. In fact, I wouldn't even have learned about these cases.
Right.
It wasn't for the honest, dedicated employees who came forward and talked to me. So in such this universe of such wonderful, wonderful people, when there's such an outlier like this, and then these wonderful people are afraid to come forward, on occasion they do, but many times they're afraid to come forward, and I understand why. It's so terrible. It taints the whole system. It harms all the wonderful care that's going on, all the compassion, all the science, it's just amazing what goes on in the hospitals, and to be tainted. A hospital like New York Presbyterian is one of the finest hospitals in the world, and to be tainted by something like this is so terrible. It really, really bothers me because in my career, in order to meet the bad employees, I had to meet a lot of good employees. And
Right.
like those wonderful, dedicated employees are the ones that help me make these cases. And to see them harmed with a reputation, like New York Presbyterian had that bit. When the president of the United States is in New York City and God forbid he should get shot or hurt, you know where they take him? New York Presbyterian, because
Right.
that's the best hospital in the city. And that's the hospital that was involved with this Dr. Hayden, with 250 women who alleged, and it turned out to be true, of course, because he's in prison now, that he sexually abused them. And they kept defending him and defending him.
Yeah, I think what we need to look at instead of the reputation of, an organization is finding the reputation of what patients and families say about that organization. I think that speaks more volumes than, the dollars and cents that people kind of put behind these organizations' names. And I think that, maybe a part of this is, they don't, again, in the States, it's different because it's all private funding. But I think there has to be a compelling case where, maybe maybe patients and families work and build a coalition where they leave reviews.
No, and I think
here's how horrible this place is.
I think they have to be incentivized, right? So if there's too many complaints against the hospital, or there's too many allegations
tear their reputation down,
abuse, maybe that's tied to funding. That if that's what speaks, then that's what has to happen.
Make those big donors see the fact that there's a prolific rapist in their organization. I think that sometimes the naming and shaming does have to happen. And again, maybe that's what people have to do.
If I was a big donor to New York Presbyterian, and look, you know how hospitals in America make their money. It's not through Medicare and Medicaid, I can tell you that.
Yeah, no.
It's through research and it's through donations.
Right.
All right. And New York Presbyterian gets a lot of donations. And if I was a donor and I heard about this case, I wouldn't give that hospital one penny until I saw major, major changes go on in that hospital. This is what we saw with some of the anti-Semitic activity at universities. Then all of a sudden, a lot of the donors said, we're not in college anymore. And that's the same thing that should happen. That we're not going to give another dime to this hospital until they show us that they've cleaned their house and they change their procedures when something like this happens.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah.
So where do we go from here, Bruce? What should we be telling people in terms of, of what's happening? How do we make people listen?
I think the media, by talking about some of these cases and publishing a lot about these cases has helped. But until we sit down with the people who change the laws, who can make a difference, and convince them that this can no longer exist, how would they like it if their mother or their sister was one of these victims here, Then they'd be screaming to change the law.
That's true.
Right? Mm-hmm. Then they would be screaming. But I'm screaming now, and I don't know anyone who's a victim.
Right.
But I've lived, 45 years in hospitals. And this one particular issue to me is really, really outrageous. And there are a lot of other issues we'll talk about today. But that one, to me, thank you for letting me vent, because if I don't vent, I'm going to explode.
Maybe another book, Bruce. Maybe
a
book on sexual assault.
If I thought it would help, and you've given me something to think about, because if I thought it would help make a difference, I think it might help make a difference. It really might. I just want people to know that there is a solution to this. There really is a solution, and but it takes a whole village of people to get this done. So.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think that you provided so many good insights to us. I just want to remind all of our listeners that Bruce's book is called Behind the Murder Curtain, Special Agent Bruce Sackman Hunts Doctors and Nurses Who Kill Our Veterans. I have this book, and I think it's a really good read if anyone's interested. And if anyone has any suggestions for future topics, we're always open to that. We'd love to hear from you and know what you think.
And Bruce, the last word goes to you. Is there anything that we didn't discuss? I know there was some things that you wanted to show, but we didn't get to that. Is there any last little bits and of course, we're going to have you back on. But is there anything that we missed that we didn't really touch on that you want to bring up in the last moments?
I have like 100.
We know you do. Just one.
I'm on a roll today.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what? I wanted to, I'll mention one more, and then we could come back and we could go through
100%
that I have. All right. But, since we were sort of on the topic of violence and all this, I want to tell you about a case that I was involved with. There was a medical researcher who submitted fraudulent research. He worked at the hospital and he submitted fraudulent research. And I was one of the people that investigated the case, and of course he was terminated, as he should have been. And he appealed and he appealed and he went to court and he lost all the appeals and everything. So one day the dean of the medical school is coming out of a grocery store upstate New York where he lives, And this researcher takes out a gun and shoots him.
Holy
Oh my
crow.
God.
Shoots him. The dean, who happened to be, thank God, a tough ex-Marine, survived. Okay.
Oh wow.
Wow.
Okay. I did not think this is where the story was going.
That story took a turn.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I could.
wow.
Yeah. This was the dean of the medical school at Mount Sinai University, Mount Sinai School of Medicine, Dean Charney. It was all in the newspaper and all. And he was shot and he survived, thank God. A really honest, terrific guy. And then the shooter sat there and waited for the police to come. But this, because we were talking about violence, all right? This is very, very scary stuff.
Right.
So now I see that some hospital executives are spending money on things like bulletproof cars. They're actually buying bulletproof. One of my friends is in the business. He sells it to them.
Oh my God.
Bulletproof cars to hospital administrators, spending a lot of money on security, both at their homes and in the office. I guess it's a reality, but it's a terrible, terrible thing. And so this researcher, of course, went to jail, and he'll be in jail for the rest of his life. PhD, all right. I mean, these people are not stupid. Look at the recent killer, right? He was an Ivy League. I think he was an Ivy League grad, right?
Yep, he was. Yep.
Not stupid. Pretty scary when the director of a hospital has to spend $100,000 to armor his car, all right, to make it bulletproof, and hire a driver who carries a gun to protect him. So that's the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Wow. I just think about, like, I don't know if it's just we've come to this point in society where when we don't like something, we just pull out a gun and shoot someone now. And the fact that all this money has to be spent on security that could actually be paying someone's salary, right? I feel like there's a lot of things that are coming up now that we need to talk about.
Yeah, like I don't know. I don't know if we can get like this would be a full other like hour conversation.
I think this would be a good idea for next episode.
The political and the climate that people that is, or the tone that's being set in relation to these types of cases. And I would probably say that the two sound a little bit different, particularly again, like, of course, violence is not the answer to solving any of these problems. And again, taking out your gun and shooting someone is not the right way to go about, solving whatever problem you have. Particularly, I think you said this researcher had crappy research or fraudulent research, and then had a vendetta. And I guess similarly, this other individual had a vendetta as well, but it was more related to how the healthcare system works in terms of insurance and insurance fraud. And essentially, I guess it was like denying claims and not receiving care, and, the debt that is accumulated. And again, it would be good to juxtapose the two cases, because what I've heard right now, I think you said that the researcher is sitting in prison, but this new individual I saw today is being charged with terrorism charges.
Wow.
So this is like from the FBI, meaning that although New York doesn't have the death penalty, that in this case, that they would be seeking the death penalty. And I'm kind of like, if the cases are similar, it's very interesting to see that, to me, it seems like this individual is going to be made an example of if we're not, following the rule of law. So it's, again, this would be like a much, much longer conversation, but definitely a very interesting one, because we can't, I don't think the answer is going out and shooting somebody. It definitely is not the case. Violence is never the answer. But we have to ask ourselves as a society some really tough questions in relation to how healthcare is delivered in the United States of America. Like we're suffering here. We have our own challenges in terms of, long wait times. We have, we have a payer system through, our insurance, like here in Ontario, it's called OHIP. But in the States, you have your Medicare, Medicaid, and the question really is, and the conversation and the tone is, why are so many people denied claims? For example, I just saw that Elon Musk said no to a bill related to, funding for pediatric cancer care. So again, I think just as a society, as a whole, we have a lot of really important questions that we need to ask ourselves to, prevent some of this violence that we're seeing. And it's going to be tough conversations all around.
When people walk into your hospital, do they go through a metal detector?
No. But we don't have the issues with it's so hard to get a gun here. So it's like, I know we just fundamentally we don't have that issue. So for example, there was a school shooting just recently in the United States. I cannot tell you the last time
we don't have metal detectors in schools either.
No.
Of any
I think the only time I passed through a metal detector is at the airport.
Yep. I was just going to say that. Yep. I think it's just two very different approaches, right? And I think and I think that
I'll tell you what happened at the VA a number of years ago before they installed the metal detector. Some guy walks into the VA hospital in the Bronx. The security guards approach him. He takes out a gun. He shoots and kills one of the guards.
Yikes.
And some hospitals, like the VA, actually have armed guards now at the hospital. Yeah, they do. Some hospitals have an armed guard in the ER because ERs, as you know, could be very dangerous.
We're used to security guards, but not armed security guards. We do have security guards in most emergency
departments. They will have like an off-duty police officer or a retired police officer because, people come in under the influence of all kinds of drugs and they could get very violent. A lot of nurses and physicians, as you know, have been harmed in the ER in particular. So it could be a dangerous place. It could be a dangerous place. So we try to take all the precautions we can, but it only takes one incident. They always put up the traffic light after some kid gets killed crossing the street, right?
Yep.
But, we try to do these preventive measures as we can, but the things only seem to be getting more violent. So I don't see any harm in having people go through a metal detector. Tell you the truth, I don't see any harm in it. I don't see any harm in them having to wear an ID when they come in. We take their driver's license, and we scan their driver's license when they come into the hospital, and they go through the metal detector, and it adds an element of safety, not only to the staff, but to other patients as well. People might think twice. Oh, I have to go through a metal detector. Oh, they want to see ID before I could get in the hospital. Yeah, it takes a little bit longer to get in the hospital, but if it makes things a little safer, I'm a proponent in it myself.
Yeah, I mean, again, we just don't fundamentally have that issue here, and I mean, I think that we still see violence in our emergency departments, whether it's physical violence, verbal violence. But again, I guess that issue with guns is we just, and I'm not saying that, for example, we have codes, so we have a code silver. So for example, if there's an active shooter or someone with a gun, that we do have codes for it. But those things here in Canada are few and far between because we just don't have the number of guns and the access to guns the United States does. It's for example, I mean, we have Probas here, but it's not like Probas in the States, where you can just go and we have register and get things. We just, although we probably face the same challenges, we just don't have access to violent weaponry.
Well, that's good. I'm happy to look. I carried a gun for almost my entire career. I don't particularly like guns.
Right.
When I retired from the government, I was so happy to give mine back. Thank God I didn't ever shoot anybody. So I was, after 30 years, I was happy to return it to them and not have that responsibility, because carrying a gun is a big responsibility.
It is.
Having that responsibility anymore. But here in the U.S., we have the Second Amendment, and some of citizens love their guns more than their kids.
Yeah. Oh, I bet.
More guns than they have kids.
Yeah. We actually did a podcast episode on gun control. I'm going to see if we can put that up in our show notes. So if anyone listening wants to hear more about that, that's available. So Bruce, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming onto the podcast yet again. We definitely want to have you on for more episodes.
We have to continue this conversation for sure.
So thank you so much for doing this. And we really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. Always a pleasure. Always.
Thanks so much for coming on, Bruce.
All righty. Bye-bye. Have a great holiday.
You too.
Bye.
Merry
you too.
Christmas.
Happy
Take care.
New Year. Thank you for listening to the Gritty Nurse podcast. If you have any suggestions or want to hear a specific topic, email us at grittynurses@gmail.com. That's grittynurses@gmail.com.
We are also speakers and authors available for engagements related to advocacy, nursing, mental health, and health policy. Please connect with us.
We want to take a moment to express our deepest gratitude to our incredible sponsors. Their generous support has been instrumental in making our podcast a reality.
Thanks to their belief in our mission, we're able to bring you engaging content and connect with our amazing community. We're truly grateful for your partnership. Thank you.